My name is Kevin Ha. I am the lead pastor at New City Church of LA. We are a church nearby here. If you go to 5th and Spring, you know where that is? You know where the last bookstore is? You know where the Alexandria Hotel is? We're right across the street. 514 South Spring Street. We meet at a theater called Los Angeles Theater Center, Sunday morning at 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. That church was planted out of the vision that came out of this ministry. So it is a church, a multi-ethnic, multi-socioeconomic church, reaching out to both the folks in Skid Row and the folks in the Lofts. So we are a community of maybe about a third of us from Skid Row and about a third of us from the Lofts and a third of us who don't know where they're from. They're actually outside of downtown. So we are a community of believers that have come together around downtown, believing that Lord is calling us to come together, love one another, and actually do life together. And so I want to invite you to come out, check us out on a Sunday morning. And we have groups, we have ministries going on. You can find out more when you come. Well, I want to preach from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. This is on the miracle of Jesus turning water into wine. Now, don't get too excited. It's probably not going to happen literally here.
I know.
Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read the passage too, and as I read the passage, I'll explain the background behind the passage, and then we'll talk about what this story is not about, and then we'll talk about what this story is about, okay? So let's go to John chapter 2, verse 1. If you have your bulletin, your program with you, you can read along with me. Yeah, the white program, read along with me. It's always good to see the word as you listen. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. So Cana is a town pretty close to Nazareth, where Jesus is from. It's a small village just like Nazareth, and wedding was a huge deal in those days. And let me tell you a little bit about a Jewish wedding tradition at the time of Jesus and how they did it at the time. The first step of the wedding is called erusin, or typically translated as betrothal. Okay, usually betrothal is more than an engagement, but is less than a wedding. And let me explain the tradition of the betrothal. Remember when Mary and Joseph, they were betrothed to each other? They weren't engaged, but they were like they were married, but they didn't consummate their marriage. And so betrothal is a idea that we don't have in the Western culture, but they had at the time of Jesus. And what happened is usually the father of the groom and the father of the bride, usually the marriages were arranged, sometimes at the request of the groom or the bride, but usually they were arranged, and they entered into what's called ketubah, which is a marriage contract, marriage agreement. And the groom and the bride sealed this agreement. You know how they sealed the agreement? They drank wine together. That's the way if you go to a Jewish wedding now, that's part of what they do. They drink wine together to seal the agreement. The groom then pays the price for the bride. It's a dowry. And to the bride's family. So in this culture, they have to pay a price to marry a woman. All right? The cost would indicate how much the groom values the bride. Then the groom would say to the bride, so now you drank wine together, you enter into the marriage contract, and then you pay the price for the bride, and the groom will get up and say, I now go and prepare a place for you. This may sound familiar. He then goes back to his father's house and builds a chuppah. A chuppah literally means a dwelling or a mansion. And if you go to a Jewish wedding, they have a chuppah now, and they get married under a chuppah. That's where this tradition comes from. So the groom goes back to the father's house and he builds a chuppah. And it's actually a place that they're going to have a honeymoon for 7 days. So it's usually a separate structure from the father's house, and it had to be beautiful. So they didn't go away on a honeymoon in those days. They went into the chuppah. The building of chuppah would take about a year or sometimes more. The groom was ready to get married when the father of groom said that the chuppah was ready. So if you ask the groom when he was actually going to get married, he would say, I don't know. Only the father knows. Does that sound familiar? During the time of betrothal, the bride had to sanctify herself and prepare herself for marriage. So that was her job, to sanctify her, to purify herself, and prepare herself for marriage. She was referred to by the community as consecrated, as separated, or paid with the price. Okay? She's been paid with the price because of the dowry. You remember? And she wore a veil to indicate that she's taken, so no guys would, be interested in her or try to propose a marriage contract with her. She didn't know, however, when the groom was going to come. So she had to keep herself prepared. And there's some parables pertaining to keeping yourself prepared. Then one day, when the father says it's time, the groom and his friend go to the bride's house, and usually at night, and blows a shofar. Shofar is this lamb's horn, and gives notice that the groom is coming. But you don't give too much notice, just enough notice to say the groom is coming. And it was customary for a bride and her friend at the wedding party to have oil lamps ready. You recall some parables about having the oil lamp ready? After they take the bride, they actually just kind of come and kidnap the bride. That's what happens. She's been waiting for the groom to come. Groom finally comes and takes the bride, and they parade around the village, making lots of joyful noise around the village as they take her to the groom's father's house. This parading around the village. If you go to a Jewish wedding, they parade around a chair, right? That's where this tradition comes from. So, they go to the father's house. When the bride and groom get there, they go into the chuppah. So there's no ceremony, there's no anything. Remember, the ceremony actually took place at the betrothal. Now they go straight to the chuppah and consummate the marriage. You know what that means, right? If you go to a Jewish wedding now, they, right after the marriage ceremony, they go into a hotel room and they disappear for a while. That's the tradition. That tradition came from here. They go into the chuppah and consummate the marriage. They have sex. Remember, I just wanted to say that because I always like to use that word in a sermon when I can. Anyway, remember, the marriage vows were made at the betrothal, right? So when it is consummated, the groom actually delivers to a trusted friend a bed sheet stained with blood, showing that the marriage had been consummated in blood. That's when the wedding party starts. It's kind of interesting. People start to celebrate. The bride and the groom remains in the chuppah actually for 7 days. But I was trying to figure out, is that possible? Do they have to go to the bathroom or something? Do they build a bathroom? I don't know. He may go in and out, but the basic tradition is that they remain in a chuppah for 7 days, and the wedding party continues on for 7 days. And that's when the wine flows, and people sing, and people dance. There's great joy in a house, and usually the entire village is invited to this wedding party. And one of the things that you do not do at a wedding party is to run out of wine. On the evening of the 7th day, this is the last day of the wedding party, the bride and the groom finally emerge from the chuppah, their honeymoon suite, and join the wedding party for the wedding feast supper. She no longer wears a veil. She is married woman. And this is the most important night of the party. And the story we have here in the wedding party at Cana take place before the feast of the last night of the wedding party. They ran out of wine. Okay? So let's go to verse 3. We're continuing on. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." Have you ever tried calling your mom woman? I try to call my wife woman. "Why do you involve me?" "Great. Kevin, can you do the dishes?" "Woman, why do you involve me?" She's not very happy. I just joke around. Yeah, I am hers.
That's the old covenant with God. God promised the Israelites, however, that a new covenant was coming. See, that's the old covenant. That's how we had our relationship with God. We follow the rules, God bless us. We follow the rules, God bless us. But he said in Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 31 to 33, this is in your bulletin. He says this, God promised the Israelites this. "The days are coming, declares the Lord," declares Yahweh, "when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors." That's the old covenant. That's the covenant that God made with Moses. "When I took them by hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant that I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds, write it in their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more." See, the reason that God says, "I'm going to give you a new covenant, I'm going to enter into a new contract with you, new covenant with you," is that the old covenant had lots of problems. New Testament is filled with explanations about the problems of living by the law, living by the first covenant. And you can look through books like Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, Romans. They do an amazing job explaining to us the problem of the first covenant. Hebrews is probably the best book to understand that. But here are a couple of problems with the old covenant. See, first, we often know the law, whether it's from the Bible or whether it's from our conscience. Most of us have the desire to do the right thing. Most of us have the desire to obey our conscience or obey the Bible. We want to do the right thing. The problem that most of us have is that we can't. We try, but we can't seem to do it. Here's how Apostle Paul explains the problem in Romans chapter 7, verse 15 to 19. Are you guys tracking with me? It's getting a little deep, but we'll come out of it and you'll get this, okay? Romans chapter 7, verse 15 to 19. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good as it is. It is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is in my sinful nature. I have the desire to do what is good. I cannot carry it out. But I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Have you guys felt like that?
Oh yeah, right here.
Yeah, I think this is a universal condition of human hearts, human life. We know the law. We know what we want to do. But we know, but we just have a hard time doing it. Yeah, we just can't do it. See, we want to quit doing drugs. We want to quit drinking too much. We want to quit getting angry at people. We want to quit being resentful at people. We want to love people. We want to care for our children. But we keep going out of control. We keep being selfish. We keep doing the things that we don't want to do and not doing the things that we do want to do. The problem here is not the law. It's just that we don't seem to have the power to obey it. Right?
Yeah,
We can't be a vessel if we don't clear out the clutter.
But God
That's
said
right. We're getting there. We're getting there.
God said you can get angry and sin not.
We're getting there. So, okay. So, we can keep trying to obey out of sheer willpower. You can white knuckle your way to recovery. Have you heard of that expression? White knuckling your way to recovery. I'm going to do it. I'm going to stop. No, you can do that. You can white knuckle your way to a correct behavior. I think most of the time we fail, but when we do succeed, we're just not happy. Have you seen guys who actually stop doing it? They're trying really hard not to do it. They're white knuckling themselves through recovery. They're just miserable.
Trying to do it alone, not with Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Trying to do it alone. See, when you try to live by the old covenant, when you try to live by the law with the best intention, doing the right thing externally, but you're still not happy. There's no joy in it. We just look like we're white knuckling, and they're often filled with condemnation and judgment against you for not doing it like they are. So, hey man, I'm doing this, but you guys are a bunch of losers. They have that very arrogant, prideful attitude as you try to will yourself out of recovery, white knuckling yourself out of recovery. Another problem with living by the law, and you guys, we'll get to the truth. Another problem with living by the law is that it promotes externalism. It means that, your sense of who you are, your worth, your identity, your value, your right standing with God is based on what you do. And so, how many times you go to church, how much you give, whether you're doing the things that the Bible tells you. And that's what the law of the purification was all about. If you obey, God blesses you. If you follow the rules, God blesses you. And that's how so many of us live. If I do this and that, God will bless me someday in the future. I'm not knocking on any of these things as a response to God's love and grace. But when we do these things to receive God's grace and love, there is no joy. There is no abundant life. We have a tendency to fake it. We become bunch of hypocrites. There's no joy in the law as we often do the law. Here's the bottom line. Our life turns into a life of duty, and it becomes ritualistic and external, and there is no heart in it. So we can actually look like we're a good person while harboring evil in our heart. We can say, oh, you know, I don't want to be like that. I'm not going to do that anymore because I don't want to be like those losers. That's what you're saying. So while you are recover, you're actually hating people. You're actually resenting people from your heart. There's no heart. See, but interestingly enough, that's what so many people think Christianity is all about. We think it's about making the right decision to do the right thing. We think it's about just trying to apply willpower to live in righteousness and call others to live by the law. But I'm sorry, this is not what Jesus is calling us to do. He is calling us to live a life of being happy, joyous, and free. He's calling us a life of feasting and rejoicing in the Lord. He's calling us to a life filled with God's grace. That's where Jesus is leading us to. That's the new covenant. The new covenant is what Jesus brings. It's like a wedding party. He is the groom and we are the bride. We are loved. He paid the price for us. We are betrothed to Him. He has gone to build a chuppah for us. He said He is coming back for us, and when He comes back, there will be a feast supper of the Lamb. That's what the Revelations call it. It is the final night of the wedding party.
You got to turn your life over to Christ and He do the work.
And here we are. We're in the middle of the wedding party, and the wine has ran out. You know, oftentimes, we often live our lives as though the wine has run out. Our spirituality is filled with legalism, technicalities about following the laws of God, or moralism, or getting our values, worth, and ID, and identity from what we do, our external behavior. Or being ritualistic, getting our sense of spirituality from the rituals that we observe. These are all good things, but Jesus is calling us to something better. He has wine for us. He has fruit of the Spirit. He has love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. He wants our lives to be filled with joy and love. He wants us to be in His presence, in the presence of God, and live in the presence of God. He wants us to know that our relationship with God is not just a willpower, white-knuckling duty to God, but the joy of being in God by His grace. Amen. That's what He's leading us to. You know, this reminds me of one of my favorite favorite movies, called Babette's Feast. I know not many of us have seen it, but let me tell you the story of the Babette's Feast. It's a foreign movie, Danish movie. It won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Picture in 1987. It's the story of an austere Lutheran sect of Christians. They lived in a little fishing village in Denmark in the 19th century. They renounced all pleasure of the world. They were black. Their diet consisted of something mixed with boiled fish and boiled bread. And it was tasteless without anything. And every Sunday, they met together and sang about Jerusalem, my happy home. Many years later, one brother had a grudge against another. Rumors spread about people in the group. A couple of ladies in the group haven't spoken to each other in a decade. The main leader had died, but two daughters, Felipe and Martine, continued to carry on this ministry faithfully. They were faithful and dutiful, but there was no joy in their lives or joy in the group. One day, a woman named Babette knocks on the door of the two daughters, and she has run away from the persecution of the French Revolution. A mutual friend sent her to them with a letter of introduction, and the two daughters are very reluctant to take her on as a maid because they're not flamboyant at all. But she pleads. She only asks for room and board, and she's willing to do whatever she is asked for that. So the women, the two daughters, two ladies agree. And for 12 years, she takes over cooking, household chores, helping with the poor, and even organizing Sunday worship. But one day, Babette receives notice that she had won the lottery in France. Babette is from France. She won 10,000 francs, which at that time was a huge amount of money. Her winning coincided with the 100th anniversary of their father, the founder's sex birth. Babette came to the sisters with a request. I have asked nothing of you for the last 12 years, but now I have one request. I would like to prepare a meal for the anniversary service. I would like to cook you a real French dinner. The sisters couldn't help but to agree. It was the only thing she asked for in 12 years. Then the supplies for the meal started to arrive. Champagne, wine, all kinds of exotic fish and meat, and the group gets a little concerned about the meal. And they're kind of afraid. And they agree not to say anything during the meal so as to not enjoy the meal, but at the same time not offend Babette.
You're losing me. Where are we going with this? You lost me.
Be quiet, G.
Wait, just wait. Listen to the story. I'll come back to this. Good question. And she cooks the most amazing meal one can imagine. That's why the movie is called Babette's Feast. And there was this special guest, a general who happened to join them. He kept on raving about the food. Nobody's saying anything because they agreed not to say anything, right? But this general who just happened to come, he's just raving about the food and mentioned that only time that he had tasted anything like this was once in France in an exquisite restaurant called Café Anglais, where the chef was a woman. And even though the group members tried not to talk, their hearts were warm. The food and wine started to affect them. And the two who didn't talk for decades started to talk. And their bitterness, their heart, and their harshness, and their anger, all of these things started to recede. And they started to laugh. And they started to enjoy. They just couldn't help it. They just started to enjoy one another. And after the dinner, the sisters find out that Babette was once the chef at Café Anglais. And they assumed that she would be going back to France. But Babette said she was not, because she didn't have any money. And the sisters looked at her and said, well, what about the 10,000 francs that you won? And Babette drops the bombshell. She said she spent the entire winning, the entire 10,000 francs on the feast that they just ate. She sacrificed everything she had for the feast. You see, this movie is a parable about God's grace. Not just a story about a fine meal. That's made clear if you look at the movie and the general speech at the dinner where he talks about that. He says, he says, mercy and truth, my friend, have met together. Righteousness and bliss shall kiss one another. We have all of us been told that grace is to be found in the universe, but in our human foolishness and short-sightedness, we imagine divine grace to be finite. But the moment comes when our eyes are open and we see and realize that grace is infinite. Grace, my friend, demands nothing from us, but that we shall await it with confidence and acknowledge it in gratitude. The point here is that grace came to the graceless ones. They heard sermons about grace all the time, but lived their lives by trying to earn God's favor with following their duties and renouncing everything. And to this group of people who stuck in the law, grace came to them in the form of a feast, Bavets feast. Grace came to those who didn't even know how to appreciate it. But when it came, the life once again came back. See, that's what Jesus came to bring. Bavet in a story is a Christ figure who sacrificed everything for us so that we may feast in his wedding feast. See, that's what Jesus is here to bring. I'm not saying that he came here to bring us good food and good wines and great cars and great mansions. That is not the point of this story. The story of the wedding in Cana is a real-life parable of the joy that Jesus came to bring. Our relationship with God is filled with joy and abundance. And remember, Jesus said, I came to give you life in abundance. He wants us to know that we can find joy even in the midst of hardship. We can find wine even in the midst of our most difficult struggles. He's saying that you don't have to white-knuckle yourselves to experience transformation in life. You can experience love, joy, peace in your heart. You can be filled with the Spirit. You can be filled with the presence and the love of God. And your response to grace will transform your heart. You see, when you live in joyous freedom and not white-knuckling, when you experience the goodness of God, it changes your heart and it changes your life. There is no limit to this kind of grace that God wants to give us. He wants to give us inside-out transformation because grace transforms us. This joy comes to the inside, and we want to live in a right way. It's not white-knuckling our way through. You experience God's grace, the feast, the wine, and this is what transforms you. You know, there's absolutely no limit to God's grace. God's love continues to come. Do you know how much wine Jesus made, by the way? 150 gallons. 150 gallons of wine. Assuming that 5 bottles make 1 gallon of wine, that's 750 bottles of wine. I don't care how big the wedding party is, that's way more than they need. The point is that God's grace, God's love, God's feast never stops. There is no limit to God's grace. But the question is, how does this happen? It's okay, you're saying, all right, we're not, it's not about struggling to make it happen, white-knuckling our way to happen. It's about experiencing the joy of freedom in Him, and then that transforming us. That's what Christianity is about. That's what Jesus is here to bring. Okay, you get that. And Bavet's feast, by the way, for you gentlemen right there, was an illustration of that. To a people who live in the drudgery of the law, when the feast came, it warmed their heart, changed their lives, and their lives. You got it? Okay, thank you. Now, the question is, how? How does this happen? How does this happen? Remember when Mary told Jesus about the wine running out? Remember what Jesus said after He said, "Women, why do you involve me?" You know what He said? He says, "My hour has not yet come," right? The hour in the book of John, you know what that refers to? It always refers to the crucifixion. That's the hour. My hour has not yet come. So, Mary says to Jesus, "Can you make some wine?" Essentially, and Jesus said, "Why do you involve me? I'm not ready to die yet." Essentially, that's what Jesus is saying, right? I'm not ready. What does that mean? What does that mean? Because it is only through the cross that Jesus could actually make wine. That leads us to joyous, free, love, feast in our lives. Because you know what? We are so messed up, we are not qualified to enter into this feast ourselves. Only if somebody paid a price for us that we can enter into this feast. Only if somebody drank the wine and said, I will come back for you. You know the communion that we do? I heard that you guys did communion a couple of weeks ago. You know what part of what that means? You know what the imagery of what that means? It is a wedding agreement. It's the way you seal the ketubah, the wedding contract. And Jesus is saying, I'm drinking this. We are married. You are betrothed. Now I go prepare a place for you. I am going to pay a price for you. His dowry was to give himself up, because he looked at us and he says, he gave of himself, paid the highest price possible for you, because that's how much he cares for you. And through that, he has brought us to this wedding feast. The wedding feast of the Lamb. You know, I think at that time, Jesus may have been thinking about his own wedding. Jesus never got married. You know what Jesus' wedding is? With us. We are the bride, the church. And in Revelations 21, it talks about the wedding supper of the Lamb. See, that is when the church and Jesus finally come together and celebrate. There is no more mourning. We are his bride. There is complete joy, and there is love. The way that the water of the law will become wine is through grace. The grace that comes only through the hour, which is his death. And that's the way he paid for us. You know, and what is our call now? We know he loves us. We know he's coming back. Our call is to sanctify ourselves and wait for the one. Wait for our groom to come back. And prepare ourselves for the coming. He is bringing grace into our life. He has brought grace into our life, but he is bringing so much more. The implications of all of this is that we are called to live in grace. That's the new covenant. We need to know that our job is not to go back and live in the old covenant where we get our sense of worth, value, and identity from what we do. But now we get it by grace through what Jesus has done. We live by the grace of the wine that Jesus brings to us. And we rejoice and we delight and we dance in our lives about the dance with the triune Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. That is what God is calling us to. And we can experience the beauty of this life. Brothers and sisters, so many of you have gotten Christianity wrong. So many of you just thought that you have to straighten up and follow all the rules, then God will bless you. You thought that's what Christianity is. And I'm here to tell you that Jesus here is here to say that that is the old covenant, and he is here to bring the Spirit of God. He is here to bring the presence of the Father, the grace of the Father, the love of the Father. He is here to saturate your heart with his love. Amen. And he wants to feast with you. And this is not about material things. It's not about getting an extra car or this or more money. It's about his presence. It's about a relationship with the Creator God. It's what our hearts are longing for that none of the other things in this world has been able to satisfy. This is what Jesus is here to bring. He is here to bring, to make water into wine. Amen? Amen. Do you guys get that? Yeah. Praise God. Praise God. Praise God. Let's go to God in prayer. Let's go to God in prayer. Lord Heavenly Father,